Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, I decided I just wanted to do something fun with all of you here in listener land, and this is a purely self-indulgent form of fun and isn't necessarily quote-unquote on topic for the podcast, but as a creative person, I just thought I'd give myself the opportunity to share with you, the listening audience, a bit about my own creative process and kind of what goes into what I do at a creative level. And just thought it would be kind of fun. So what I'm going to be doing today, the title for this week's episode is The Alchemist and the Eagle, which is my new album and is the soundtrack for the audiobook of the album by the same name, which is Volume 3 of Tales of Arduin. And if you've been listening to The Fate of Morani, that of course is Volume 2 of Tales of Arduin. But what I wanted to do was tell the stories behind the music. So it's a little bit recursive, but it's the idea that there are stories within stories here, and I thought it would just be fun to share that with all of you and indulge myself as a creative type of just giving myself the opportunity to talk about my creative process. It's not something that I get a lot of opportunities to do. I've been interviewed many, many times, for example, out there in the world, but almost always everybody wants to talk, of course, about 5-MeO DMT. They want to talk about psychedelics. They want to talk about non-duality. They want to talk about all kinds of other things. And I have done a couple interviews and podcasts with people where I do get to talk about my creative process and either my writing or music or art or things like that. But it's pretty rare. So I just thought I'd give myself the opportunity here on my own podcast to do it. And if you want to listen, great. And I'm going to tell you some stories and give you some deep background information about some stuff. And if you just want to wait for the next interview to come out, well, that's cool too. But anyway, I'm just here to share with all of you. So I'm going to be talking about songs off of The Alchemist and the Eagle and sharing what's behind all of it. Okay? So thanks for being with me, and I hope you enjoy some of these insights and peeks into my own creative process. So the first song that I want to share with you guys and also tell you all about is the very first song on the album, and that is The Egg. And I'll start with the fact that actually this was the second song that I created for this particular album. The first song that I recorded actually was what is now song number 2, The Grand Lucidium, and maybe I'll come back and talk about that a little bit later in this episode here. But I created The Egg, track number 1. I created that second, but then wanted to use that as track number 1 because that's also the title of the first chapter of the novel. And actually, let me talk about that for just a moment, because I suppose that's pretty important for describing the creative process. So with an album like this, when I'm creating quote-unquote a soundtrack, it's obviously different than creating a soundtrack for a movie where you are composing music to go along with specific sequences of action or plot developments and things like that. So the way that this works for me to create a soundtrack album for the novel is where I started was, I'm getting out my piece of paper because I still have it, as I went and I wrote down all 36 chapter titles of the novel. And then for creating the songs, what I did is I would look at the chapter titles and then sometimes pick up the book and kind of go through the chapter and say, okay, what's going on in this chapter? And then trying to create music that I feel somehow expresses or captures or represents what's going on and basically is inspired by that particular chapter. And it could be inspired by the characters, it could be inspired by the location or the culture or whatever big dramatic thing is taking place within those pages of the book. So I started with the Grand Lucidium, song number 2, because I had a good idea of what I wanted to do musically for that particular portion of the book. But I put The Egg, the second song that I created, I made that first. As I said, that was for chapter 1. So I thought, well, that's a good place to start the album. And then everything after that within the album, there are 15 songs, and each one beyond these first two is actually presented on the album in the same order that I created the song. And just in general, this tends to be how I personally create albums when I sit down to create a new musical collection. Is I like to present the music on the album in the order that the songs were created so that listeners, if they're going to go and listen to the entire album, which is how I like to make albums. I know that these days everybody just puts out singles and remixes and collaborations and stuff like that. And the album is kind of a dying art form for a lot of musicians and for a lot of listeners as well, and especially if you're just getting stuff off of your Spotify playlist and just random music is coming your way. But for me, the album itself is an entire work. So by presenting the songs in the order in which I created them, you, the listener, get to hear where I'm going with the music and how I'm creating each track to either contrast or flow with the song that came before and in reference to the song that comes next. So I'm always looking at it as sort of this sonic totality. And also as a journey, that the journey is going to start somewhere and it's going to go to all these different places and then it's going to eventually resolve somewhere. So that's how I look at constructing an album in and of itself. So with that, starting with the egg was the obvious place to go, because it's the first chapter of the book, and it works better as an introductory song than the Grand Lucidium. But then everything follows after that in the sequence and order in which it was created. So with the egg, chapter 1 of volume 3 of Tales of Ardoin is when the reader first gets introduced to, honestly, probably my favorite character that I've ever created in my novels. So I've written 6 novels. There's a lot of different characters, and Zhao he's just my favorite. And he's my favorite because he's a rather sophisticated and complicated character. And one of the themes that I'm working with in Tales of Ardoin is that I don't want to present any kind of absolutes of good or evil or right versus wrong. That one of the things I'm trying to show within the book or books, I should say, is that these judgments of right or wrong or good or bad or questions of character, that they're complicated. And so Zhao is a very complicated character, and he goes through some really interesting transitions over the arc of the last 2 books of the series. And even here, like if you go through Orbai's Vision or The Fate of Mirani, you will notice that the quote-unquote enemy is never named and never really described. They're just kind of called the people of the West. And so the reader doesn't get to know who these people even are until book 3. And early on, as I was crafting the stories, that I was thinking about how, like in in Lord of the Rings, that we never really get to know Sauron as a character. I mean, he's obviously the bad guy, and he's in charge of all the orcs and the Uruk-hai, and, he's doing all the bad stuff over there in Mordor, and he's some big flaming eye at the top of a tower, but we never really get to know him as a character. We don't really get dialogue with him. I mean, there's a couple moments when the characters are touching the Palantir, and they're able to interact with Sauron, but it's really quite brief, and so we don't get him as a character. We don't get to know him in any way, or what motivates him, or what he's thinking about. And so early on, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I could write this whole series without getting into who the enemy really is and just kind of leave it sort of this vague, nebulous force. But then I eventually got the idea for Zhao. And I got really excited about it as I was writing The Fate of Mirani. I was like, okay, I know who Zhao is now. And he is the alchemist that's in the title of The Alchemist and the Eagle. And was really looking forward to playing with this character, and had some pretty fun ideas of how his character was going to change, yet not actually become a good guy. That he is a bad guy, and he doesn't really become a good guy, but he is very necessary. And he's not a moral character, that he's kind of a sociopath. So he's not compelled by sympathy or compassion, and he's mostly interested in how he can manipulate others to get what he wants for himself. All written long before the Trump administration. So I was really looking forward to playing with Zhao. And so where I started was with this chapter of the egg. And this is the first time that we get to meet Zhao. This is the first time that his name is used in the stories. And like all of my novels, you can pick up any one of my 6 novels, and there are lots of elements within the novels that actually are autobiographical for me. And this is one of those chapters. And so I used one of my own experiences and made that the basis for introducing Zhao to the readers. And the elements here are absolutely formative for the entire arc of the story itself. And so this is it's a major turning point in the story, and it helps to define what came before and also what's coming next and how the story actually resolves. Okay. Well, by the way, I should have mentioned that this podcast contains lots of spoilers. So I'm going to try not to give too much away, so that if you plan to read the story or listen to the story out in the audiobook form that I just released, I don't want to give too much away. But anyway, I'm still going to talk about some stuff. So for this story, for this chapter, I used an experience that I had at Burning Man, probably in 2002 or maybe 2003, which is when I was busy writing the Tales of Arduin stories. And this experience at Burning Man ended up really shaping the entire arc of Tales of Arduin. So this is the story behind the story, okay? So one night at Burning Man, my friends and I, we took a bunch of mushrooms and we went and we wandered out on the playa and just walking around looking at shit, because that's what you do at Burning Man, right? All kinds of cool art. So if you know Burning Man, you know that way out on the playa, there's always a temple. And I think I probably got separated from my friends or wandered off from them because in my own memory of this event, I don't remember anybody being with me. I just remember being by myself. So out at night, I'm wandering across the playa, going out to the temple on mushrooms. And, it's kind of windy and the dust is blowing everywhere. And then there was this temple out there. And, I'm tripping on the mushrooms, and I'm coming up to this temple, and I felt it was very enigmatic. Like, what is this temple about? What is it? What is this temple celebrating? And I walked up to it, and there were these large discs that were placed, above head level, so a little bit high up, and they had all these really cool symmetrical geometric designs on them, kind of these mandala-like discs. And so I'm standing up and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm tripping mushrooms, and kind of internally I'm asking, like, what are you all about? Like, what is this? And so I'm in this whole experience with this geometric disc that I'm looking at. And eventually my neck kind of gets tired, and I'm just sort of frozen there looking at this, looking up, and just feeling really frustrated for whatever reason. Like, it's not revealing its secrets to me, and, whatever mindset I was in at the time. And because my neck was tired, eventually I decided to look down. And when I looked down, there was sort of these conical structures coming up out of the playa and sort of nestled into this little nook within this temple was these conical structures, and then resting inside the tips of these conical structures was sort of this egg sitting there. And as soon as I looked down and I saw that egg, it was just this overwhelming sensation of yeah, this is what it's all about. It's about the egg. It's about the potential that arises from this geometric chaos to give birth to something new. And I was just tripping out on that. And I was just so satisfied. And it was such a dramatic change from this sense of just being frustrated and unsatisfied to suddenly I'm just supremely satisfied that this egg is there. And so this is the story that makes it into chapter 1 of The Alchemist and the Eagle. And Zhao is having this dream that he's wandering across some kind of barren desert landscape, and he finds this temple that has this egg. And just, to foreshadow, book number 4 of the series is called The Fifth Temple. And it has something to do with an egg. So this experience at Burning Man fundamentally shaped Tales of Arduin and gave me the plot and character juice to introduce Zhao to the audience. So here I'm going to go ahead and play the song, share the song for you guys. This is the egg. And so keeping in mind that since this entire character and plot development comes out of a mushroom experience at Burning Man, what I wanted to do with this song was definitely bring in more of an electronic music vibe to it, because that's what you hear mostly out at Burning Man. So I wanted to bring in sort of this Burning Man-like element, and also wanted to use sounds that for me kind of had sort of a desert night, windy sort of feel to it, and then have the song end with sort of a sense of mystery and expansion to it. So with all of that said, that is the story behind the story of the music. And let's go ahead and listen to the first track on the album of The Alchemist and the Eagle, the soundtrack, The Egg, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about some more songs. Okay? That'll be fun. Here we go. Here's The Egg. Okay, well, that was a lot of fun to share all of that. Hope you enjoyed that track. So, keeping with the mushroom theme, I'll tell you another little personal autobiographical mushroom story or information and relate it to one of the tracks on the album. So this next track that I want to talk about is, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's track 5 on the album, and it is called The Heart of the World. Now, within the construct of the story itself, that the heart of the world is a place called Jayani Arduin. And that comes from the language of Ilani. So there's a number of different languages that I constructed for the different cultures within the world of Arduin. And the original language is Ilani. And here, as I've done elsewhere in the book, that I've actually taken inspiration from my time at the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico, where I did my field work for my PhD in religious studies. And their word for heart is J. And so here I constructed this word of J Ani. So J is heart, Ani means belonging to, and then Arduin means the sacred world or sacred land. So this place is called Jayani Arduin, and geographically it's kind of located in the center of the world of Arduin. And also highly inspired by my time at Mescalero, where I was studying about the Mescalero Apache mountain spirits, that within their culture and tradition that they recognize 4 sacred mountains in the 4 directions. And, well, since I'm talking about this, I might as well share this bit as well. At Mescalero, depending on which group of mountain spirit dancers and ceremonialists you might go to, that they have different colors that are associated with the 4 directions. But the standard colors for the 4 directions and the 4 mountains at Mescalero are green, yellow, white, and black. And sometimes they're presented in different order. But what I did for Arduin is I took those 4 colors, but I rearranged the order of black, green, yellow, and white. So each color represents one of the 4 sacred mountains in the 4 directions, and then Jayani Arduin is the heart of the world that exists in the middle geographically of these 4 sacred mountains. And just in case you've noticed this, so Book 1, Oribai's Vision, the cover is black. Book 2, The Fate of Marani, the cover is green. Book 3, The Alchemist and the Eagle, the color is yellow. And in Book 4, The Fifth Temple, the cover color is white. But anyway, Jayani Arduin, the heart of the world. So the inspiration for the heart of the world actually comes from this park that I used to visit when I lived in Santa Barbara, California. So there was this park that was not too far from where I lived, and what I like to do is I would ride my bike there and I'd just hike through the park. And sometimes what I'd like to do is I would take some mushrooms and then I'd ride my bike and I'd go to the park and I would just sit there in the park for hours. And super beautiful in the spring. You know, all the grass is green and all kinds of wildflowers would be blooming. And there was a little stream that would come through and you could hear the frogs chirping and croaking, and there were these big boulders, and I would go and sit on the boulders in the oak trees, and just, it was kind of like my little happy place. Right? I'd go there and I'd trip mushrooms, and then sometimes I would bring one of my wood block flutes with me, and I'd just sit there and I'd play the flute, tripping mushrooms, you know, out in the forest. And that's just something that I liked to do. So this is one of these autobiographical elements that makes its way into the story, that this is actually where Tales of Arduin begins, in Oribai's vision. So Oribai is in Jayani Arduin, and he goes there because it's like his special place, that in the world of Arduin, there are no people who really live right in this area, that it's not occupied by any particular culture. So he likes to go there and he hangs out by the streams and the boulders and the oak trees, and he plays his flute by the water. And also significantly, this is a place where the psilocybin mushrooms grow, and Orbai collects the mushrooms here, and then he takes them to the Yamne people so that they can use them in their ceremonies. So mushrooms are a theme that show up throughout the Tales of Ardoin books, and this is a side story behind the story behind the story, is that my book, Mushroom Wisdom, that I published in 2006, is actually, after I had written the Tales of Ardoin books, that I realized that I had put all of this stuff that I had learned from my experiences with mushrooms. I had put them into the stories, and I decided, I could just extract that and like make a book about mushrooms about it. So that's actually how I got started publishing and writing about psychedelics, was after writing these Tales of Ardoin stories. But anyway, in book 3, The Alchemist and the Eagle, if you haven't picked up on it yet by listening to Orubai's vision in The Fate of Marani, that the world of Ardoin is essentially doomed. They are heading towards an apocalypse, and this is something that is coming very, very quickly within this world. So Orubai, at this point of the story, he is trying to make his way north because he is trying to answer some really fundamental questions that he has, and he thinks that the answer is to the north. So he's making his way there. But before he heads north, he decides that he is going to stop at Gianni Ardoin. And that for him, he feels that probably this is the last time that he's ever going to be here. Now, Orubai is a creature or a being that has lived for thousands and thousands of years. And he goes through these cycles of death and rebirth. And every time he returns to Gianni Ardoin, to the heart of the world. But he feels that this is the last time that he's ever going to do it. So in constructing this song, The Heart of the World, what I wanted was a feel of some natural elements, because this is just a natural place. It's where he goes to vibe off of nature and play his flute and just hang out with the birds and the trees and the creeks. And I also wanted to include some flute, because Orubai is depicted as having a flute and playing a flute, and that there are, other aspects of the story that revolve around his flute playing and his music making. And I also wanted it to be, not necessarily a sad song, but not necessarily a happy song either. So have kind of a sense of tension and a sense of sort of impermanence of maybe this is all going away. Maybe this is the last time. So it's kind of bittersweet in that sense. So that was the inspiration behind this song, The Heart of the World. And let's go ahead and listen to it now. Okay. Now, the next song I want to share with you is the one song on the album whose title is not exactly the same as the chapter title. So the song I'm talking about is A Strange Kind of Death. Now, the chapter itself is just entitled Death, but I thought that was a little bit bleak for a song title and doesn't really capture what I wanted to communicate within the song. So for this chapter, we are actually returning to the character of Zhao. And this is just, it's all part of the tremendous amount of fun I had writing about Zhao and just playing with him as a character. I mean, I just can't emphasize enough how much Zhao is like really my favorite character that I have ever written in a story. And this one also, in a way, revolves around a pseudo-psychedelic. So we have, within the stories of Tales of Arduin, we do have, of course, psilocybin mushrooms. Those are evident and easily identifiable. But I've also created a few other psychedelics within the world of Arduin that are not real psychedelics. So one of them would be the elixir of the Serpent King of the Moitan. And with the elixir of the Serpent King, really the basis of that would be the liquid extract of Salvinorin A. And that the whole Moitan, the cosmic serpent, the Serpent King character, all of that comes out of Salvia Divinorum experiences. And if you're familiar with Salvia, that you might be able to check out the chapters about the Moitan and the Serpent King, and you might be able to get the reference. But it wasn't meant to be literal. It was inspired by Salvia. Then we also have the moon moth wings, and this is presented particularly in the Fate of Mirani. So the moon moth is this particular moth that pollinates between the Maguen tree and the Jaspin incense plant, and this is actually based on the idea of ayahuasca, that ayahuasca is the combination of two different plants, and then you get the effects. But by the moon moth that visits these two different trees actually develops a psychedelic property within its wings. And that's the only inspiration from ayahuasca with the moon moth. And nothing else beyond that is meant to represent like ayahuasca phenomenology or psychedelic experience in any way. It's just inspired by that. And actually, when I wrote these books, I had never had ayahuasca at that point, so that it was all just theoretical anyway. Then the other psychedelic element that I entered into the stories is this Waiju, or the dream pearl, or dreaming pearl. And this is something that really bothers Zhao quite a bit, because Zhao is a cynic and he is a scientific materialist. As an alchemist, he's identified as a physical alchemist, which is he's a Ringa, and basically has a very scientific view of the world, of how different chemicals and properties interact with each other. And something that bothers him about this dream pearl is that he can't figure out how the damn thing works. So he's able to shave off pieces of this pearl, and then he ingests it, and then he has these visions. And he's been doing this for a very long time. He's actually managed to immortalize his body along with the other ruling Ringa of the Jalao Empire. And so he's been using this dream pearl, and he likes it because it gives him visions. And he's always thought that the visions are just fanciful plays of the subconscious or unconscious, and so he looks at it as a form of entertainment. But just like with the first chapter of The Egg, that he's been having visions that seem to be confirmed by consensus reality. And this is really bothering him because he's never been able to chemically identify what in the pearl makes these visions possible. And then how is it that he is now having basically prophetic visions and connecting to things in the real world in a way that he never had before or never thought that he had before via the pearl? So in this chapter, Death, he makes a visit out to one of the old wizards of the sea god, Ulmantur. Goes out to this old island where this old sea wizard lives. And Zhao has a lot of disdain for this sea wizard because Zhao intentionally uses religion and superstition to manipulate his empire. That's how he has gained power, is through the manipulation of people's religious beliefs. And he basically looks down on anyone who practices what, he just calls paganism or heathenism. And that the religion of the Jalal is the one true religion, and they have a manifest destiny to take over the world and convert all the heathens to their one true religion. And the only reason that it is true is because Zhao has figured out how to preserve his body in a way that makes him and the other ruling Ringa immortal, and therefore it's obviously true. And all the other religions are obviously false. But it's all a system of manipulation. It's all a fraud. It's all a con. Again, all written long before Trump and the Trump administration, but yes, obvious parallels there. So anyway, he goes out to this island of Huktads to visit with this crazy old wizard, as he likes to describe him. And this was just one of the fun ways that I wanted to play with Zhao, that not only is Zhao going through this really profound transformation where he decides, okay, here's a spoiler alert, that he doesn't want to be the thumb of the righteous hand of the Jalal. And that's what Jalal means in their language, is righteous hand. And he's the thumb. So there's 5 ruling alchemists, but he's the thumb. And the thumb is obviously the most important because without the thumb, you can't grab anything. You can't, reach out and grab it. And that's what he likes to do. He likes to reach out and grab it. So the way that I'm playing with Zhao in this chapter is that he gets the dream pearl from the old wizard, but it comes at a price where Zhao is himself being manipulated, and it changes his life. And we don't really learn how it changes his life until the very end of the story. But this is just part of the character development that I had for Zhao, and really enjoyed playing with it in the story. So in this song, A Strange Kind of Death, so I retitled it that because he doesn't actually die, but he goes through a ceremonial death and rebirth completely against his will. This is not something that he wanted to do. It wasn't something he was seeking out, but it's something that's happening to him. And it's all part of the larger transformation that's going on. And of course, the whole story is ultimately about transformation. That's the main theme of Tales of Arduin. So to make him go through this kind of transformation was a lot of fun. And of course, many of the other characters go through their own transformations within this. And death and rebirth is a major theme of the entire story. So this is a strange kind of death. It's not a real death. It's a strange kind of death. And it's very confusing for Zhao, and he reacts impulsively, as he tends to do. But for the song, what I wanted was ocean sounds, and also sort of a dreamy sense that's kind of ambiguous, that just kind of drifts in and out and sort of floats and washes and crests and just has that kind of mysterious watery feel to it. And I also used actual sounds of waves within the song, but for the various synth sounds that I wanted to use within the song, I wanted them to have sort of a wave, sort of, kind of coming in and out sort of feel to it, to kind of match this strange kind of death that Zhao is going through as he's out on this island. And it actually, the death itself takes place, not in a boat, because he gets out of the boat, and it has to do with sharks. But that's all I'm going to tell you about that, because, maybe you'll listen to it later. But here is A Strange Kind of Death. All right. Well, there we go with Strange Kind of Death. So for the next song, it's actually the very next song on the album, and it is Between Silence and Thunder. And this particular song and the story behind the song doesn't have anything to do with psychedelics, so here we're shifting gears just a little bit. But it does have to do with something that I've already mentioned here in this episode, and that is my time at the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico. So this was back in the mid to late 1990s is when I was doing my field work out at Mescalero, and ended up spending, took a lot of shorter trips out there for a couple weeks at a time, and then eventually spent about a year and a half, not quite a year and a half, but spent a good amount of time living out there. And I had a little hotel room that I was renting on a monthly basis down in the small little village of Tularosa. It's just kind of down the road from the Mescalero Apache Reservation. And I was working with a few of the older medicine men and women on the reservation, and also with the various mountain spirit dance groups and ceremonial leaders. And my main guy, my main teacher and mentor out there was an old medicine man named Juelito. And Juelito really liked having me around. And in some ways, I was kind of like a little surrogate son for him. And we pretty much spent every day together. And so, I wasn't living at his place, but just down the road from him, like a 20-minute drive or something like that. And I would start every day by going to Juelito's house, and we would drink coffee and watch Wheel of Fortune on the TV. And then if I had somebody else to go see for the day, then I would go out and see that other person or go to that ceremony or do whatever. And then I would end the day by going back to Juelito's house. And by then his daughter and her husband and all the kids were home from school and home from work, and we'd all have dinner together and we'd watch TV. And then I'd drive back down to my place down in Tularosa. So pretty much spent every day with Juelito, and then also spent a lot of time just driving around with Juelito. And at the time, I had an old-fashioned paper map of New Mexico, and I had a highlighter pen, and he and I drove around most of New Mexico. We even went down into Texas. We went to Arizona. So I took a highlighter, and I highlighted all the roads that we went on throughout the Southwest there. So we got around a lot, and we would drive around and we'd talk about stuff. And that's just what we did. And then also Juelito was retired from any kind of ceremonial role, but he was definitely an authority of Mescalero tradition. And so he would bring me around to ceremonies, and, because I was with Juelito, everybody was, relatively cool with that. And, he was just absolutely instrumental, not only just for companionship and friendship, but also for learning about Mescalero culture. So one of the things that he shared with me at one point was he had a particular stone that he wanted to show me and wanted to tell me about. So he had this kind of interesting round stone that kind of looked like it was baked clay. And he said, he pulled it out to show me, and he said, yeah, this is a lightning stone. I'm like, oh, what's a lightning stone? He's like, yeah, any medicine man or medicine woman, they'd want to have this stone. Like, this is a really highly prized stone. And he explained to me that the way that you get a lightning stone is that you have to be by a tree that is struck by lightning, and the lightning has to pass all the way down the tree and then go into the earth. And he said you have to dig really, really quickly after the lightning strikes and dig until you find the stone. And according to Juelito, if you don't find the stone right away, you'll never find the stone. But if you find the lightning stone, then that means you now have like thunder and lightning medicine. And this is very, very powerful. And so any medicine person would want to have this in their medicine bag. So that story just always stuck with me. And none of the other medicine people that I ever talked to out at Mescalero ever mentioned anything about this. Nobody brought out a lightning stone, but Walito had one, and he was, quite pleased that he had this lightning stone. So this then becomes part of the story. So within the story, we have this character of Kaljat, and he is a member of the Motu culture, and Kaljat is the one who basically organizes the resistance against the Jalao. So the Jalao are moving out from the west, and they are essentially trying to take over all of Arduin, and not only take over the other cultures and dominate their religions and their politics, but they are also digging for a mineral that they use to power their empire. And so they are creating ecological destruction everywhere that they go, that they do not have good environmental practices. They don't have an EPA, which we in the United States might not have for much longer. Anyway, so Kaljat, well, his backstory is that his wife and children were killed by the Jalao. And so that's what inspires him to take up arms against them. And then more tragedy strikes Kaljat. And so he goes to their sacred place. And their sacred place is the valley of Ma'aklanu. And this is where the singing stones are. And these singing stones are understood to connect the Motu to their ancestors, which they identify as being different constellations within the sky. So he goes to this sacred place after tragedy strikes yet again. And everyone else in the resistance movement is like, oh shit, like Kaljat's broken now. He's done for. That we don't know if we have a resistance movement any longer. So it's quite a dramatic moment for everyone. And he just basically sits there silently, naked, covered in a blanket or a buffalo hide robe. And eventually it starts storming, and there's lots of thunder and lightning. And he's basically catatonic. He's just not responding until finally lightning strikes a tree right next to him. And then he finally gets up, runs over to the tree, starts digging down in the earth, and finds a lightning stone. And once he finds it, he takes that as a sign that he will never be defeated in battle, and therefore, he is ready to lead the resistance once again. So with this song, Between Silence and Thunder, I wanted sounds that were thunderous and big and explosive, and also sort of a driving sense of this is going to move forward, this is going to keep going. Even though there might be pauses, we are going to keep going, that this is the resistance against the Jalao. And also just with the Jalao themselves, that I was kind of thinking of them of sort of like a Mongol-like culture, in the sense, that the Mongols, that they raided their neighbors and they created their own expansive empire. And they were quite intimidating, right? That's why China built the Great Walls. Like, let's keep the Mongols out. So they're kind of an intimidating culture. And just thinking about that region of the world, they use these stringed instruments to, like sort of cowboy sort of music in a sense, like Tuva and Mongolia. You get these stringed instruments, and they were horsemen. And these are also cultures where you would use horses in combinations with golden eagles to go hunting. So there's just a lot of themes of like sort of horseback riding sort of sounds and sort of like these stringy instruments. And also the Motu, like Kaljat himself, he has his hunting eagle Zenta. So that's kind of where all that comes from. But these are the elements that I wanted to capture in this song between silence and thunder. So let's go ahead and give this one a listen, okay? All right. Well, how about we do just one more song? Okay, there's 15 songs on the album. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The album itself is an hour and 12 minutes long. So if we just listen to the music, it would take up all that much time. And it's already been, I can see, an hour that I've been talking here on this episode. So we'll just do one more song. And there's not a whole lot of story for this one, but it's more about the creative process itself. So the last song that I'll share with you here is this track, Leaving for the Unknown. And going back to, I had my list here, you can hear the paper crinkling, my list of chapter titles, and I'm not sure which chapter I originally started creating this song in reference to. But I picked one of the chapters and I started creating this song, and I would say I got about halfway through constructing the song, and then was just really feeling, damn, this song doesn't really go with this chapter. The way that this song is developing doesn't express what this chapter expresses, and it's not a good fit, and it's not going to work. And creatively, in that moment, it was a bit of a creative crisis. So I think this is song number 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes, this is song number 10 on the album. And as I've explained, that I like to work from front to back, beginning to end, and that this was not going to be the last song on the album. And I'd already created 9 songs, and that definitely was not enough for what I wanted to do for this project. But I'm stuck on this song. I've got this song that I've created, and it doesn't feel right for the chapter. And again, I was about halfway through in terms of actually, constructing the song. But it was the end of the day, so it was time for me to go downstairs and make dinner for the family, and then, hang out with my son and my wife, and that I'd be getting back to the song the next day. And I'm just sitting there throughout the night, like sort of in crisis, where it's just like, shit, the song doesn't work. Like, what am I going to do? And then at some point, I had the idea of like, you know what? Well, maybe it would work for that other chapter. So then I came back and, got to my computer before I went to bed, and I was looking at my chapter titles and like, you know what? I think maybe this would work with this other chapter, for this chapter, Leaving for the Unknown. You know what? No, I'm wrong. I didn't do it that night. It wasn't until the next morning. So yeah, because now I'm remembering, I'm lying in bed like kind of, oh shit, am I going to be able to complete this project? I'm just really feeling stuck. And just in case you're wondering, this is not a feeling that I experience all too often in terms of my creative output, that I do sort of describe myself as being compulsively creative, and that I don't get writer's block. I don't get musician's block, whatever we might want to call it. Like, I just make shit. Like, that's what I do. I just keep making stuff. And the reason why this one was such a stickler for me is because I'm specifically trying to create music that is inspired by what's happening in these chapters. And this one didn't work. So I was just like, what do I do? What do I do? So when I woke up the next morning, I'm looking at my chapter titles. I was like, you know what? I think it's going to work for this other song. And this is just a funny part of the creative process. That is, as soon as I was able to reassign this same song to a different chapter, there was no longer a block, there was no resistance, there was no confusion, there was no uncertainty. And then I completed the rest of the song, and then I associated it with that chapter, Leaving for the Unknown. And I was like, this works perfectly. And I was just absolutely thrilled with it. And then following from that, over the next week or so, I recorded the next 5 songs, and there was no longer a block in the process anywhere. And everything just flowed smoothly and effortlessly. So I wish I remember what the original chapter was that I was thinking this would go with, but doesn't really matter. So I associated with this chapter, Leaving for the Unknown, and in this chapter, several different characters have to leave in several different directions to do several different things. And the one that I really like, this is another one of my favorite characters in the story, because She seems like a real background auxiliary character, but she's actually fundamentally central to the story. Because this now is one of the creative aspects of writing a novel, that when you're writing a novel, you can ponder the question of who's writing this story? Like, who is the narrator? Whose perspective is the perspective that's being communicated overall within the story? Now, one of the ways around that, like what I did with the Solendarian game, is I chose 5 perspective characters, and each chapter is told from one of their perspectives. Okay, so that's how I solved the problem there. But here in Tales of Arduin, I started it without knowing who my perspective character really was. So for Volume 1, Orbai's Vision, it was all Orbai's perspective because it was a book about him. It wasn't told in the first person, but it's all told by his perspective. But after I finished that first one, I really knew that I need to branch out into many more characters who have a perspective, who we have insights into. And I was unsure of how I was going to do that until I settled on, there's this one character, Kalisha, this adolescent girl, and she actually is the one who's writing this story. She is the author of Tales of Arduin. She becomes a very central character, but she still remains background in the sense that she herself is not doing anything important, but she is there and she is documenting and she is researching. And it isn't until one of the early chapters here in The Alchemist and the Eagle that I reveal that. So it's it's an idea that germinated after I wrote Orbai's Vision. I give hints of it in The Fate of Mirani, but it's now here in The Alchemist and the Eagle that we really reveal that, and then it's brought home again at the very conclusion via the epilogue of the Fifth Temple. So for Kalisha in particular, her world changes dramatically, and she has to leave for the unknown, but this comes at the turning point when she now has a purpose. Her old purpose is stripped away from her, and her new purpose of document what is happening so that anyone who survives this apocalypse will be able to know what actually happened in the future. This becomes her job. She is given this purpose by Orbai. And this fills her with a sense of freedom and excitement and exploration that she can leave for the unknown, and it actually makes her excited rather than feeling despair or feeling scared or feeling like the rug has been pulled out from underneath her, which has just happened. So this song, as soon as I associated this song with that kind of theme and feeling, everything just fell into place, and that became Leaving for the Unknown. So here's the track. right. Well, that is the story behind the stories, behind the music from 5 songs off of my brand new album, The Alchemist and the Eagle, the soundtrack, which goes along with the audiobook for The Alchemist and the Eagle, Volume 3 of Tales of Arduin. I am really looking forward to recording Book 4, The Fifth Temple, and creating a whole new album of music for that. Of course, The Alchemist and the Eagle, the soundtrack, you can find that at Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Spotify, and you can also find it along with The Fate of Morani, the soundtrack, which I've got stories for all those songs too, and also Oribai's Vision, the soundtrack. But we obviously don't have time for that here today. And now, thank you for listening and indulging me talking about my own creative process of how I go into creating these songs, what I'm thinking about, how it works with the story, where the stories are inspired from, and all of that. It's been quite a bit of fun for me to do this. And so I hope you listened. I hope you enjoyed it. And be back with more from Tales of Arduin with chapters from The Fate of Morani, and of course, new interviews still to come here on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. Thanks so much for listening. You can also find all of my music at Bandcamp at martinball.bandcamp.com or just at my personal webpage at martinball.net. You will find all of my albums linked from Bandcamp there at my personal webpage. It's all available for streaming for free. You don't have to pay anything. You can listen to it. You can also download an album and pay for it if you like, which is, hey, I'm not going to argue with that. But anyway, thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoyed the music. Hope you enjoyed the stories, and be back next week with more here on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. Be well.